All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into a story that's got everything. A World War II mystery, a family's promise, and an incredible quest for answers that spanned more than 60 years. This is the story of the USS Grunion.
You know, this one question, this heartbreaking plea written to the commander's wife, Catherine Abel, was at the very center of one of the war's most baffling maritime mysteries for, well, over half a century.
So, to really get what this search was all about, we've got to go back in time, back to the height of the war in the Pacific, where a brand new submarine was sailing right into one of the most hostile environments on the planet.
Her skipper was Lieutenant Commander Manert Jim Abel, and the Grunion, this was a top-of-the-line, brand-new Godot-class submarine, but its life was unbelievably short. She was fresh from the shipyard when she sailed out of Pearl Harbor, straight into the dangerous, fog-choked waters off Kiska, Alaska, right in the middle of the Aleutian Islands campaign.
Then, on July 30th, 1942, the Grunion sends out its very last message. And it was a tense one. The crew was up against some serious enemy opposition. They had just 10 torpedoes left, and they were ordered to head back to their base at Dutch Harbor. But they never made it. Nothing. The submarine and all 70 souls on board had just vanished, without a single trace. And that was it. For over 60 years, that's where the story ended. The official word from the Navy was that its fate was an unsolved mystery. They figured it was either an accident or an unrecorded enemy attack. For the families, there were just questions. But you know, for Commander Abel's 3 sons, the story was anything but over. And what comes next is a mission that was fueled by memory, by love, and a deep, deep need for closure. Yeah, for the Abel brothers, this was deeply, deeply personal. John, the youngest, he was only 5 years old when his dad was lost. So 6 decades later, driven by what they themselves called a love story for their father, these brothers started their own investigation. They were determined to find out what really happened. Now, they had absolutely nothing to go on. The Navy's files were closed. But then, a series of just wild, improbable events, all tied together by the early internet, was about to change everything. You're not going to believe where the clue that cracked this whole thing wide open came from. After years of digging online, the brothers connect with this guy in Japan, a naval enthusiast named Yutaka Iwasaki, and he had found something extraordinary, an obscure, forgotten account of a battle that wasn't in any official military records. And the difference was just night and day, right? The official U.S. Navy records? Zilch, nothing. But Iwasaki, he sends them this translation from a Japanese maritime journal that laid out in detail a fierce battle between a Japanese freighter and a U.S. sub on the exact day the Grunion disappeared. Okay, so this log from the Japanese freighter, the Kano Maru, it's like reading a movie script. It says they were hit by a torpedo, they fired back with their own deck gun, and actually scored a hit on the sub right near its conning tower. Then, the submarine just vanished. All they heard was a dull thud, and the next day, a huge oil slick. This was it, the first real piece of evidence of Grunion's final moments. So, armed with this bombshell piece of information, the first real lead in 60 years, the Abel brothers decide to do something pretty incredible. They're going to fund their own deep-sea search. They were going to go find it themselves. And get this, they actually hired a boat you might recognize, a modified crab boat from the show Deadliest Catch. And the place they were looking? Man, it was not easy. They were searching the treacherous slope of an underwater volcano near Kiska Island. So after days of just staring at the sonar screens, scanning the ocean floor, something pops up. The team called it a cigarette smudge, just this tiny little blip. But the size, the dimensions, they were a perfect match for a Godot-class submarine. This had to be their target. So in August of 2007, they send down an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, to check it out. And there, at a mind-boggling 3,000 feet, that's nearly a mile straight down, the cameras send back the first pictures of the Grunion in 65 years. They'd done it. They'd found their father's submarine. Finding the sub was just this huge, incredible moment. But the wreck itself, it held the last, and maybe the most tragic piece of the puzzle. And the answer was not what anyone was expecting. So to really get what happened, you have to know about one of the most notoriously awful weapons of the entire war, the Mark 14 torpedo. This thing was a disaster. They ran too deep, they didn't explode, and worst of all, sometimes they would actually circle back around and hit the very sub that fired them.
And that's exactly what the video from the ROV showed. You could see this huge dent right on the periscope shears. But the real smoking gun? The sub's rear dive planes were jammed, locked hard in the dive position. That was the key.
So when experts put all the pieces together, the Japanese account, the wreck footage, it painted a terrifying picture. Grunion probably fired one of its last torpedoes. The faulty weapon circled back and slammed into the sub. It didn't explode, but that massive impact was enough to jam the dive controls, forcing the Grunion into a steep, uncontrollable dive from which it could never recover. It was sunk not by the enemy, but by its own weapon.
You know, finding the USS Grunion finally brought closure to 70 families, a final, painful answer to a mystery that was lost to the sea for over half a century. It's an incredible testament to a family's promise, and it just makes you wonder, what other stories, what other histories are still out there waiting at the bottom of the sea?